What's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're doing a quick midweek update. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video and you learn something, please just leave a like on my channel as it really helps it out. And then, of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content that you can go back, rewatch, and get caught up to speed. And although things looked very grim for the cannabis industry, folks, for that month of March, New York has legalized recreational cannabis and immediately expunges former pot convictions, which is a massive milestone, not just for social justice, but for cannabis in general and the sentiment around it. And we have here, I look forward to signing the legislation into law, said Governor Cuomo. I don't know if he signed it yet. The New York State legislature formally voted to legalize and regulate recreational cannabis for adults and expunge the records of people previously convicted of possession. Shortly after 10:30 p.m. Tuesday night, the New York State Assembly voted 100 to 49 to pass the marijuana legalization bill officially. And Governor Cuomo has previously said that he will sign the bill into law once it reaches his desk, and on Tuesday night he reiterated that plan. And as of right now, this is where we're at. It was introduced in the committee on the floor calendar, passed the Senate, passed the Assembly, delivered to Cuomo. He's going to sign it today. And on the eve of that, as you can see, after hours, Aphria is up 3.75%, Tilray is up 3.77%. Don't you just find this funny that you know that Aphria and Tilray are Canadian licensed producers that have no footprint in New York? So, you know, although they are not US-based companies that are going to benefit from it, they're the ones that are seeing action. So just got to point that out, is how once these US cannabis multi-state operators are on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, when that day comes, folks, it's going to be beautiful for us. And that is what we are holding for. Trust that the patience will work out. And what's funny is that Canopy Growth, the company with plans to actually buy an MSO and get into New York once federal legalization happens, they're down less than Tilray and Aphria. So I think this goes to show that, you know, maybe a lot of institutions out there just trade on what's available and they don't actually even know the technicals. I don't know. I'm just pointing that out, though. I find that funny. Let me know what you think in the discussion, just because, I'm hoping MSOs start to follow that trend upwards, because obviously it benefits Cureleaf, Green Thumb, Vireo, and Cresco Labs, that have a footprint in New York, right? As of right now, they all have 4 dispensaries, I think, 4 or 3. But I just want to point that out because, regardless, we will get to the main exchanges. And a good update is that the SAFE Act has made it into the Senate. So the SAFE has been reintroduced and passed the House already. So we are out of the House, and now it has made its way to the Senate. This bill would shield financial institutions from having legal repercussions from the federal government when dealing with cannabis businesses. Now, the bill is still being reintroduced in the Senate with nearly a third of the chambers as co-sponsors. With the new administration being controlled by the Dems, this bill takes on a new path. Now, just to point out that the bill's being reintroduced, and it has a third of co-sponsors, so I believe that it needs to have that 60 in order to pass without any sort of extra debating and having Kamala Harris come in and provide that extra vote. So, this is kind of where we're sitting right now. Know that, all the MSOs are in a great spot and are either profitable or close to profitability, and then that SAFE is now in the Senate, and we just need 60 sponsors and this for eventually for this to pass. And there's just been so much momentum, and with New York passing, I think people see that this brings on more benefits than harms, especially, Republican politicians, whatever side of the table. If you're a human and you just want to think how can we make things better for, people in our country? Well, let's make sure that cannabis businesses can operate with safe access to banks and things like that. So just saying, although we've gone through a very tough month, I have a feeling that things will trend up in the right direction going forward after New York. And remember, we've had instances saying that SAFE might pass by midsummer, by end of summer. So just brace yourself and be prepared for that, because that is something to consider. Mind you, great news that it's in the Senate now. And Biden's opposition to cannabis has not changed, the press secretary mentioned. And just to reiterate, while the text that legislation hasn't been released, the expectation is that it will, at a minimum, federally deschedule cannabis. Biden, meanwhile, backs modestly rescheduling the plant, decriminalizing possession, legalizing medical cannabis, expunging prior cannabis records, and letting states set their own policy. So his views have not changed on it. Whether the president would veto a legalization bill if it arrived on his desk is another question, but what's the point of asking that question until his team, who's tasked with putting this bill together, Schumer, Wyden, and Booker, let their team do his thing, because that's what they're there for. And, Biden's just going to sign what is brought to his desk, much like Cuomo signing what comes by. So this is just a reiteration of his press secretary saying that his views hasn't changed. it's not necessarily Biden's job to come up with all these bills. So let's hope that the team in charge will do that and continue doing that. And just got to trust that this is going to happen, folks. Now, top Texas lawmaker reaffirms support for medical cannabis and decriminalization at youth GOP event. This is massive. Top Texas lawmaker reaffirms his support to potentially reform laws in Texas, which is the state that has no legal medical or legal adult use. But it's also a state with 30 million people, so that would be the biggest market in the South to go. House Speaker Dade Phelan said during a Texas Young Republicans event that members of the group like talking about cannabis, and while personally admitting that he wouldn't be able to distinguish marijuana from oregano, he said, "I understand the issue." See, that's just his problem. He's uneducated. Nonetheless, the speaker said that he voted for a limited medical cannabis legalization bill during his freshman year in the legislature, and his support for the reform is partly based on the fact that he has a sister with severe epilepsy, and small amounts of CBD oil make a big difference in people's lives. See, when it affects you personally, that's when you start to see the broader picture and how, it can affect people outside of your circle. So this is great. And if we can prescribe barbiturates and highly addictive pharmaceuticals, why can't we look at other options, correct? And options that are safe, natural, non-addictive. Every session we built upon that. We need to continue to build upon that. We absolutely do. And cannabis is an exit drug to a lot of, to alcoholism, addiction to opioids. We're just scratching the surface. So just wanted to point that out. News out of Texas is big. Let's hope that this develops in the right direction over time. Now, I found an interesting article here. It's a bit older, but basically saying that state and local cannabis revenues jumped 58%, surpassing $3 billion in 2020. So cannabis taxes are a small part of state and local budgets, clocking in at less than 2% of tax revenues in the states with legal adult use sales, but they're also one of the state's fastest growing revenue sources. And I bet you can agree that the states like this. Governments like making money. And powered by an expanding legal market and a pandemic-driven boost in cannabis use, excise and sales taxes on cannabis jumped by more than $1 billion in 2020, or 58% compared to the year earlier. That's a massive jump, and that's just from more markets opening up. And as more markets open up, this is going to continue to happen. And I can assure you that lawmakers and politicians like this because it makes them look good, because they're making money because of the changes that they made. Now, in total, these taxes raised more than $3 billion last year, including $1 billion in California alone. These are the findings of an ITEP analysis of newly released tax revenue data from the 10 states where legal states of adult use cannabis took place last year. So the blue is excise tax revenue, and then the red is general sales tax revenue, and I imagine you can add more general sales tax revenue to adult use products versus, for medical, you can't use as much. Mind you, this just goes to show 82 million? This is amazing. So again, this is just very positive for the benefits of reforming cannabis as well. And there's just one thing that the next most significant source of revenue is Illinois, which started legal cannabis sales January 1st of 2020 last year. So, every state does it differently, but we learn based on, this is actually a bit more of a breakdown. Cannabis tax revenue, California bringing in $1 billion on their own, 34% of nationwide revenue. Compared to 2019 revenue, it's up, not 100%, but a good amount of growth, 393 million. Illinois, 250 million, where last year there was nil. That is big, and I think states going forward are going to copy Illinois' approach because clearly it benefits the state, and the state needs taxes, and if these taxes are used and spent well, they are going to make life better, hopefully. But just goes to show that year-over-year increases are pretty evident in all of them. And then there's one thing I did just want to point out, though. They say down here is that it is going to change based on, so at that point, price-based taxes like those used in Washington and Colorado and most other states will collapse, while the weight-based used taxes in Alaska, California, Maine, and New Jersey will fare much better. Basically saying how some states can just tax based on the price, whereas other ones have a more just flat percentage. And it seems as if those they think will fare much better. Now, this article will be down here if you want to read more into it, but that's basically what I wanted to highlight out of it that I think is worth knowing. Growing revenues for any government is a great sign as well. And so lastly, the father of cannabis research plans a new revolution nearly 60 years later. If you're not aware of Raphael Mechoulam, I suggest that you look him up because he's a very interesting, and he's the godfather of cannabis science. The more we checked, the more we saw that we have new potential alternatives alternative to probably two of the most horrible diseases you can find today. Now, in 1963, Professor Raphael Mechoulam sent shockwaves through the scientific world when he became the first scientist to isolate and eventually synthesize the active psychoactive ingredients in the cannabis plant, THC, CBD, and several other cannabinoids, and finding which led his lab to discover the endocannabinoid system in our bodies, in every human body, in 1988. When he found this out, people were like, what? And still to this day, there's so little research because cannabis is still Schedule 1, which is crazy. But these discoveries were foundational to the world of cannabis-related medicine research, leading to him as the godfather of cannabis. Now, his latest research on cannabis-derived acids, however, seems to have taken cannabis research to a completely new phase, one which could finally bridge the funding gap between the potential for medical cannabis treatment and the funding that companies are willing to invest in its research and development. Now, I always thought in the past, is there not a way that you can take THC from the plant and sell it as a pharmaceutical? Obviously, I'm not a doctor. I don't have the background in this, but I just always thought that could be possible. But then when you think of potentially creating a synthetic THC when you can use real one, what's the point of trying to come up with a fake one when you can use a natural one? But mind you, anyways, I have no idea what's going on in this sense. I shouldn't be talking. But just pointing out that's what I've always thought in the past. Like, how can't you figure that out? Mind you, these days, Mechuolam leads the medical team for EPM, which plans to register on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange toward the third and fourth quarters of 2021. So it appears he's back in business with the company doing research. But yeah, this was really interesting. So we sat down for an interview. When you look at the cannabis field, none of the plants actually contain THC or CBD in any cannabinoids. All cannabinoids will appear only on a plant only after the plant is dead. What? So when it's out in the field, it can't actually get you stoned or it's not psychoactive. It's only once you harvest it that these compounds appear. You learn that there's a big difference between the compound you find on a plant when it's alive, growing, sucking up CO2, doing all the great things plants do, and then the compound you'll find when it's dead. Like, what? Harvested, you mean? Is it like... So I'm still confused on this. I was just reading through this. So if you guys don't mind, obviously you can skip through. But Swiss has said that cannabis acids are an exciting avenue for new research because while the entire industry is working on the compounds that decarboxylate from the plant after it starts drying up, we were more interested in looking what happens on the plant itself. He said that for pharmaceutical companies to show an interest in investing in a new drug, they needed to either be more potent, cost-effective, or have fewer side effects than the current approved treatments. And I mean, clearly, cannabis has a lot less side effects than the current pre-approved treatments. So, and just referring to opioids in that sense. So it must be better than what we have now. Well, anything can be better than what's causing the amount of deaths that we have now in the addiction problem. So we just need a solution. He said that you must also be able to patent your drug, telling the post, this is the whole part of being able to make money off of it too. There has to be a main reason a lot of pharmaceutical companies aren't looking at cannabis. You can't patent a formula for a natural molecule. Mind you, Swiss has said that while the potency of cannabis acids is higher than its cannabinoid counterparts, the cannabis acids are very unstable, meaning they break apart into cannabinoids very easily. If you tried to make them from the plant or tried to consume them, the heat of your body would break them down and they would decarboxylate. He added that cannabis acids are not easily reproducible in that they depend on complicated forms of extraction which require very specific plant growing conditions. So in order to get around these obstacles, Swiss has said Mechuolam's team synthesize molecules in a lab which replicate the structure of the cannabis acids but do not easily break up into cannabinoids, allowing them to be reproduced on a large scale without the need to depend on a living plant. So that's fascinating. So far they've developed 14 different molecules, 8 of which are completely novel discoveries, meaning that we own very exclusive patent on them since they were a new discovery into the scientific world, he said. So what was this company he's working with again? Definitely good to remember that name. Anyways, going through this, basically, what were they saying? And point being is, this is why we need to end cannabis, criminalizing, or this is why we need to decriminalize cannabis so that we can research the plant. So just wanted to point that out and introduce you to Raphael Mechoulam if you have not met him. And so last thing in this video, I did want to touch on, now this is pure speculation. I'm not saying this is true. I just did a bit of digging yesterday and found some interesting information with the help of some people on Reddit as well that connected a few dots. But just wanted to point this out that this is also a thing, and potentially, again, I'm not saying I believe this is true. I just want to share this all with you. So I did the video yesterday on the Chicago-based cannabis giant, part of a federal pay-to-play investigation written by the Chicago Tribune, and this was a hit piece against Green Thumb Industries. So interestingly enough, I found out that there is a hedge fund, Alden Global Capital, that is planning to buy the Chicago Tribune in a deal valued at $630 million. Now, Tribune Publishing, publisher of the Chicago Tribune and other major newspapers, has agreed to be acquired by Alden Global Capital in a deal valued at $630 million. Should a hedge fund be allowed to invest in newspaper? I don't think so, but apparently they can. Announced Tuesday, well, I mean, just goes to show that they can influence what you end up reading in an article, which is just crazy. But announced Tuesday after the stock market closed, the deal would create one of the largest newspaper operators in the U.S. It follows weeks of negotiation between a special committee of Tribune Publishing's board and Alden, a hedge fund with a history of deep cost-cutting at its other newspaper properties. Get this, cost-cutting? So we're going to get to that in a moment. But I'm just pointing out this factual article from February 16th. Alden, already Tribune Publishing's largest shareholder of 31.6 stake, is offering $17.25 a share to buy the rest of the company. That amounts Alden paying about $431 million for its 68% shares that it doesn't already own. Now, in addition to the Chicago Tribune, Tribune Publishing owns the Baltimore Sun, the Hartford, Connecticut Courant, the Orlando, Florida Sentinel, the South Florida Sun Sentinel, the New York Daily News, the Capital Gazette in Annapolis. They own all of these newspapers, and that's just crazy because get this. So, the Denver Post cut staff at the Cannabis. What is the Cannabis? Well, the embattled Colorado newspaper, the Denver Post, is no longer staffing its groundbreaking first-of-its-kind cannabis news vertical, the Cannabis. Newsroom leadership confirmed Friday, a decision that is surprising cannabis and journalism circles today. Now, this is from 2018, but get this. I just want to point out is that they are cutting staff at the Cannabis in 2018. And who's to blame? These layoffs are putting the Cannabis on life support and destroying the Post's ability to comprehensively cover Colorado, and it's entirely to blame on Alden Global Capital, the black-hearted hedge fund that owns Digital First Media and 100 American newspapers, including the Post. These vulture capitalists are literally hated throughout Denver, and while everyone from Governor John Hickenlooper and Mayor Michael Hancock, again, this is dated 2018, stands in support of the Post, we need to continue to let Alden Capital know that they are not welcome in Colorado, and they need to sell the Denver Post to be more responsible owners who will finally curb this undemocratic bloodletting. So this was crazy for me to come across because basically you can imagine that Alden Global Capital is going to try and do the same thing in Illinois, and this is just a prime example of, a 31% shareholder owning this article and allowing something like this to be printed with no sources, very little legitimacy or actual facts behind the data. So, not saying it's true, it's speculation, but I'm just pointing out that if hedge funds that, are shorting cannabis companies can purchase newspapers and put out hit pieces like this, yeah, there's a lot wrong, but, being able to ask the right questions and try to find these articles really helps you get the real story. And again, I don't mean to say that this is just fact, this is real. I'm just pointing out what you can see right in front of you, let you make the decision. But it's just like, if this is allowed where, again, hedge funds can manipulate the media and tell stories that favor, who knows how much money they had invested in potentially shorting these MSOs, and maybe that's what they've gone down. And again, Alden Capital isn't a big bank like JP Morgan. It's not Wells Fargo. It doesn't have to abide by, or it basically doesn't want to risk investing in cannabis without fear of federal prosecution. They're too big, right? Whereas Alden Capital Group, sure, they can invest in cannabis, and if they want to short and then they want to put something out like this to profit, that should not be legal, but, clearly there's always more to learn out there. So I wanted to highlight this for you folks. I found that was quite interesting. But nonetheless, amazing news. New York has legalized cannabis. Hopefully that will be signed quite soon. And it appears that, at least for that reason, Canadian LPs are heading up after hours. But hopefully this will be the end of the gruesome march that we've just been through. And MSOs will continue heading up as we get more as we move closer to SAFE being passed and eventual cannabis reform. So I hope you enjoyed this video, folks. Please leave a like on it. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. If you have any questions or if you found anything quite interesting, because again, there's so much happening on the ground, and that's why you always got to focus on fundamentals, not the share prices. So that is it for today. Everyone have a great week, and I'll actually see you on Friday. I'm going to drop a special video walking through why I own all the investments I own, just to give you a full video that you can watch through it if you want to try and learn what I look for in companies. And then on top of that, I will be launching something special. So I look forward to seeing you on Friday. Have a great week, everybody.